and welcome to ABP Live. I have with me today veteran diplomat Ambassador Arun Singh. He was India's ambassador to the US as well as Israel. We are going to talk to him the current situations, the soaring tensions between Iran and Israel, and what basically it entails in terms of the fact that the world is already witnessing two wars going on. And of course, what India's role can it be? We've seen how the Ministry of External Affairs has called for immediate de-escalation and where this thing start. Welcome to ABP Live, sir, and thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you, Nayanima. Happy to be with you.
Thank you. So the obvious question that, comes to anybody's mind who is in India and also, in the region where Iran is also a good partner of India, so is Israel. How do you see the tensions spiraling out of control? We know the Damascus attack, the Israeli airstrikes on Iran consulate, and the fact that Iran had been warning that we'll take a retaliatory action. But something like that, was it expected? Now the US is saying that we'll call in the G7 leaders together for a united diplomatic approach. You being an expert, how do you see the situation panning out?
So, Nayanima, at one level, step by step, there has been an escalation since October 7. Mm-hmm. At another level, efforts are being made by different countries to prevent a wider regional conflagration. Now, October 7, the Hamas attack in Israel itself was an escalation compared to the situation before that. The manner in which Israel has responded over the past 6 months, and they have their own justification, that again, many would describe as an escalation in this situation. Then Hezbollah and the Houthis have responded. Hezbollah has shut down the entire 40-kilometer northern belt of Israel. A lot of people from there have migrated to the south and are living there. They're not able to live in the north. And the Houthis have impacted heavily on shipping in the Red Sea, which has impacted not just Israeli shipping, but shipping related to other countries. It has also impacted on India. There's worry related to our exports, related to prices, related to delays in trade. So that has been an impact. But a new dimension that has been added is the escalatory aspect related to Israel and Iran. And although many have argued that there is a hidden conflict going on between them for a long, long time. Yes. And so clearly, despite various measures that Israel has taken in the past against Iran, against Iranian supplies to the Hezbollah, attacks on those supplies taking place in Syria, a direct attack on what was seen as Iranian consulate premises, clearly is an escalation. And therefore, the Iranians felt that they needed to respond in some way for their own reasons. And the kind of attack they've carried out, several hundred drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, is an escalation. But at the same time, the US has been able to work with Israel to prevent any major damage within Israel. Most of these have been intercepted. Perhaps a couple of them have gone through. There have been no reports of significant loss of life or injuries, a report of one person being injured. So damage on Israeli territory has been avoided. So now the attempt is to see if politically Israel can be prevented from feeling the need to respond to this Iranian attack, so that the situation de-escalates. But if the Israelis feel for their own reasons that they need to respond, then we have to see where the situation goes.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, sir, because that's exactly what the world is fearing, in the sense that Israel is not going to, take it sitting down. I'm sure they're going to have some retaliatory action. But if in case that happens, do you see a third front opening up? Because the Israel-Hamas tensions are already very much on, and so is Russia-Ukraine. And amongst all of these, how do you think the international community, especially the US, and of course the UN's role is also being questioned, how do you think, all those dynamics will work?
So the Israel-Iran escalation is not really a third front. It's very much a part of the second front, okay, related to the Israel-Hamas dynamic. Because Israelis believe and have argued and said publicly that Iran is heavily involved in supplying both the Hezbollah and the Hamas. Now, so here, I think the Israelis have to take a call on where they see their primary interest. They say that one of their objectives is to try and eliminate the Hamas. Therefore, if that is so, should they continue to focus on what they're doing in Gaza? Or do they believe that they may gain in the short term by involving Iran more directly and taking the focus away from what is happening in Gaza? So that's a calculation that I think the Israeli leaders, policymakers, strategists, the defense ministry has to make. And I think most countries around the world would want that Israel not escalate to the level of getting heightened Iranian involvement. At one level, there is already to some extent Iranian involvement. You saw one ship has been intercepted in Straits of Hormuz, and although it's a Portuguese registered, partly Israeli owned, with Indian sailors on board. So, many countries are impacted as a result of this. And if, there is a sense that behind the scenes, Iran has been supporting, supplying the Hezbollah, supplying the Houthis, otherwise they wouldn't have built up these capacities, then Iran is a sense involved, but behind the scenes, not directly. And therefore, I think most countries would want to prevent a direct Israel-Iran confrontation if they can, because that would be a major escalation. And from India's perspective, the Gulf is a major source of energy for us.
Right.
We have 8 million Indians living and working in the Gulf, remitting more than $35-40 billion annually to India. So that again is a very important source of foreign exchange for us when we are an overall trade deficit country. So this region is vital for India's interests, and certainly I think from India's perspective, as was the statement from the Ministry of External Affairs yesterday, we would not want to see an escalation of this situation.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. You spoke about the energy factor, sir, and that is what is the biggest concern. Is what I can gather from experts in India is the fact that the immediate outcome of this, and a sort of an outcome of the tensions that are rising, is the rise in the oil prices. Now we've seen, basically because of the Russia-Ukraine war, how India was compelled to import more oil from Russia because the Saudis and others went on for a different kind of buyer framework. But do you see supply chain networks getting disrupted? Because again, the Strait of Hormuz is an important sea lane, and of course then there are this energy supplies. Although we don't take oil from Iran anymore because of the sanctions, but this does disrupt the setup, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And although we have very little import or none from Iran, we buy a fair amount from Saudi Arabia. We buy a fair amount from Iraq. Therefore, oil import from the Gulf through the Persian Gulf, through the Straits of Hormuz is very important for India. And so if that gets disrupted, or otherwise if the overall global energy prices go up, that will certainly have a negative impact on India. In terms of prices here. But beyond that, while energy is certainly a very, very important factor, we should not underestimate the importance of the safety and security of more than 8 million people, Indian, who are living in the Gulf. Mm-hmm. And so that if there is any major conflagration, we have to worry about their security. And that's something that the government will need to factor in. And again, relating to the Russia-Ukraine war, if you see in that context of the Russia-Ukraine war, although the West, US, is heavily involved in that through supplies to Ukraine, they have not involved themselves directly in the conflict with Russia. So using that parallel to the extent that a direct conflict between Israel and Iran is avoided, I think would be important. I think that's what all the countries are trying to do, because if we saw the way the US and UK have acted, they positioned their forces to try and also intercept the incoming drones and missiles. And the whole attempt was to try and prevent the level of damage that happens in Israel so that the political compulsion on the Israeli leaders for further escalation is reduced. So let's see, I think to some extent they succeeded in that. But how it plays in Israel is something we'll have to watch out for. And a UN Security Council meeting has been convened for today at 4 o'clock New York time. And we have to see how that plays out and whether that gives the Israeli leaders a peg to try and not escalate the situation further.
Mm-hmm. So now coming to India's role, I know you have a busy day for ahead, so I'll quickly wrap it up. But the key in this is India's role now. Although yes, it is not sort of feasible for India, which is going to face elections now, by the later half of this month, to go into such a tensed area. But we really cannot ignore the fact that both are our good partners. How do you think India can maneuver this? Question A. And another part of the question will be, where do you see, since you're a veteran diplomat, how do you see all those initiatives like the India Middle East Economic Corridor or the I2U2? What happens to those in the light of what is happening, which we know is not really going to end well?
No, certainly those initiatives could be impacted. Certainly the India Middle East Economic Corridor, which involves first Saudi Arabia, from India to Saudi Arabia, then UAE, on to Jordan, Israel, and then to Europe. And that was pegged very much on what was expected to be a process of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And there were discussions going on around that. And Saudi Arabia was expected in turn some movement on the Palestinian issue, and also some security guarantees from US and defense and nuclear-related, civil nuclear-related technology partnership with the US. So that process certainly for now has been disrupted. So that's not going to happen. But as a result of the present conflict between Israel and Hamas, as a way out, as a longer-term way out, if the two-state solution and efforts to a two-state solution are revived and there is progress, and Saudi-Israeli normalization happens as a part of that, then of course again IMEC could be revived, but at the moment certainly taken a hit. I2U2 again was pegged very much on the deepening cooperation that was happening between UAE and Israel after the Abraham Accords of 2020. And at that time, there were a lot of exchanges taking place between UAE and Israel, business exchanges, cultural exchanges, and they were willing to cooperate more and more with each other. As against, for example, Egypt and Jordan have recognized Israel for decades, but don't really have an active cooperation framework. UAE was moving ahead with that. So now, if the situation gets complicated on the Israel-Palestine front, we have to see how UAE assesses the reactions in the Arab countries, among the Arab population, how Saudi Arabia reacts. So at the moment, there's no be no slowing down of I2U2. But what happens further will certainly be a question mark. And I think in terms of what India should do now, clearly, as we discussed, India's vital interests are involved. And India will have to signal that its interests are involved and it is deeply concerned with what is going on. And I can anticipate that there will certainly be conversations that the Indian leadership will have with their counterparts in Iran, in Israel, Gulf countries, US, and others. Already there was a report of our foreign minister having spoken to the UK foreign minister, foreign secretary. So to see how everybody could work together to try and contain the situation. Because, of course, we have to be understanding of the limit of our influence. Because ultimately, every country will operate on the basis of how they perceive their interests. And Israeli decisions, although we have a very strong relationship with Israel, Israeli decisions will be determined by the domestic political context of how they are operating. There's a certain structure of government. They believe in very strong action against October 7, whoever was behind it. And they are not committed to a two-state solution. So how will they emerge from that? And Israeli will also assess what is the level of support that they have in the US. Because if they feel that the US is completely behind whatever they decide, that will affect their course of action. But in the US, there is divided opinion. The Jewish community in the US is divided. The Arab and the Muslim vote in the US is critical of the US government support to Israel, and President Biden is aware of that and the impact it could have on his own election in November this year. So if there is some wavering on the US side, or the US has said clearly that they are opposed the actions that Israel is taking in Gaza, but they give an ironclad commitment to the security of Israel. So that's how they have defined their policy and are trying to tone down the Israeli actions. So I think in the framework of this, while mindful of the limit of our influence, clearly, it would certainly make sense for the Indian leadership, which is active in this area, involved in this area, to step forward and have the necessary conversation to see what contribution they can make towards de-escalation of this situation.
So just put it simply, you think that India should now, I mean, in the sense, really need to play a fine balancing act, in the sense not to upset either Iran or Israel, right? And that's going to be very difficult.
It's not a question of upsetting, but to reach out to all and reflecting where your interests are and how there is, from your perspective, need to ensure that your friends and partners do nothing that harms your interests. Now, whatever, for example, the Iranians have done in terms of the shipping in the Hormuz, they may be targeting Israeli ownership, or they may be signaling regarding their capability in the Strait of Hormuz. But now Indian nationals are impacted, and that has affected Indian interests. And from one of the reports suggested that the ship was carrying goods to India. So again, there is an impact on India. So I think stating clearly that our friends need to factor in our interests in whatever course of action they take.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador. That's been very, very useful. That was Ambassador Arun K, India's former ambassador to the US and Israel, telling us the situation that is escalating between Iran and Israel and how India needs to safeguard its interest in the long term. Thank you for watching this interaction for ABP Live. This is Nayanima Basu.